The December morning sun filtered through the frost-covered windows of Windsor Castle as King Charles III stood in his private study, surrounded by the weight of centuries of royal tradition. The ornate desk before him held several drafts of his upcoming Christmas address, each version carefully edited and re-edited by his team of speechwriters. But something felt incomplete, hollow even, as he read through the formal words that would reach millions across the Commonwealth. Charles removed his reading glasses and rubbed his tired eyes. The past year had been one of unprecedented challenges for the royal family. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had faced a private health battle that had kept her away from public duties for months. The absence of her steady presence had been felt not only within the family but across the nation, where her grace and dedication had earned her a special place in people's hearts. The King's private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, entered the room carrying a fresh pot of tea and the morning newspapers. The headlines, as usual, speculated about the royal family's plans for Christmas, but Charles barely glanced at them. His mind was elsewhere, thinking about the woman who had brought such stability and warmth to his eldest son's life. "The final draft is ready for your approval, Your Majesty," Sir Clive said, placing a leather-bound folder on the desk. "The BBC team will be here at 2 o'clock for the recording." Charles nodded but didn't immediately reach for the document. Instead, he stood and walked to the tall windows overlooking the castle grounds. In the distance, he could see gardeners tending to the winter flowers, their dedication unwavering despite the cold. It reminded him of Catherine's own dedication to her royal duties, never seeking the spotlight but always present when needed. The king had watched his daughter-in-law navigate the complexities of royal life with remarkable grace. From her early days as a commoner thrust into the world's most scrutinized family, she had grown into a figure of stability and compassion. Her work with children, her support for mental health initiatives, and her genuine care for people from all walks of life had not gone unnoticed by Charles. But protocol dictated caution. Royal Christmas addresses traditionally focused on broad themes of service, faith, and Commonwealth unity. Personal references were rare and carefully considered. The monarch's role was to speak to the nation as their sovereign, not as a father or grandfather sharing family news. Yet as Charles reflected on the year that had passed, he felt a growing conviction that this Christmas address needed to be different. The royal family had faced unprecedented scrutiny and criticism in recent years. Public trust had been tested by various controversies and revelations. Perhaps it was time to show the human side of the monarchy, to acknowledge that behind the crowns and titles were real people who cared deeply for one another. The king returned to his desk and picked up the prepared speech. The words were elegant and appropriate, touching on themes of service, gratitude, and hope for the future. But they felt distant, impersonal. Charles knew he could deliver this address flawlessly, but would it truly connect with the people he served? He thought about Catherine's approach to her royal duties. She had always found ways to inject genuine emotion and personal connection into her public appearances. Whether visiting a children's hospital or attending a state dinner, she possessed an ability to make each person feel seen and valued. Perhaps there was wisdom in her approach that he could apply to his own role as monarch. The king pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. Not the formal prose his speechwriters preferred, but simple, heartfelt words that came from his experience as a father watching his family navigate challenges together. He wrote about the importance of family support during difficult times, about the quiet strength that comes from knowing others care, and about the way love expresses itself through small gestures and unspoken understanding. As he wrote, Charles found himself thinking about specific moments from the past year. The way Catherine had maintained her dignified silence during her health challenges, never seeking sympathy or special treatment. The grace with which she had handled the inevitable speculation and concern from the public. The strength she had shown in supporting her children through uncertain times. But he also thought about the criticism the family had faced for not being more transparent about Catherine's situation. The delicate balance between privacy and public duty had never been more challenging to navigate. Some had called for more openness, while others respected the family's desire for discretion during a difficult period. Sir Clive returned an hour later to find the king still writing. The carefully prepared speech lay forgotten beside him as Charles continued to craft something entirely new. The private secretary recognized the determined look in his monarch's eyes and quietly withdrew without interrupting. Charles was remembering a conversation he had with Catherine shortly after William's engagement announcement. She had expressed concern about living up to the expectations that came with royal duty, worried about disappointing the people who would look to her for guidance and inspiration. Charles had assured her then that authentic service came not from perfection, but from genuine care and commitment to something greater than oneself. Now, years later, he could see how thoroughly she had embraced that philosophy. Despite facing personal challenges that would have understandably caused others to retreat from public life, Catherine had continued to fulfill her duties with remarkable grace. Her recent appearances, though fewer than usual, had been marked by the same warmth and genuine interest in others that had always defined her approach to royal service. The king paused in his writing to consider the broader implications of what he was contemplating. A personal acknowledgement of Catherine in his Christmas address would certainly be noticed by royal watchers and commentators. They would analyze every word, searching for hidden meanings and family dynamics. Some might see it as appropriate recognition of a beloved family member's contributions. Others might criticize it as a departure from the traditional formality expected of such occasions. But Charles had learned through his long years as heir apparent that sometimes the most meaningful gestures were those that acknowledged the humanity within the institution. The monarchy's strength had always come not from its distance from the people, but from its ability to represent their highest aspirations while remaining grounded in shared human experience. He continued writing, crafting words that would honor Catherine's service while fitting naturally within the broader themes of his Christmas message. The challenge was to create something that felt personal and heartfelt without becoming overly sentimental or inappropriate for the formal occasion. As the morning progressed, Charles found himself thinking about the ripple effects of kindness and recognition. In his own long apprenticeship for the throne, he had often felt the weight of expectation and the challenge of proving himself worthy of the role he would one day inherit. The moments when his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, had publicly acknowledged his efforts had meant more to him than any formal recognition or title. Perhaps Catherine, despite her characteristic modesty, would benefit from knowing that her contributions had been noticed and valued not just by her immediate family, but by the head of the institution she served. And, perhaps the public, seeing their monarch acknowledge the personal costs of royal service, would gain a deeper understanding of the humanity that existed within the royal family. The king set down his pen and read through what he had written. The words felt right, authentic in a way that the prepared speech had not. They honored Catherine without diminishing the formal dignity of the occasion. They acknowledged the challenges the family had faced while emphasizing their shared commitment to service and duty. But he knew that the decision to include such personal elements in his Christmas address would require careful consideration. The speech would be watched by millions, analyzed by experts, and remembered as part of his legacy as monarch. Every word mattered, not just for its immediate impact, but for its long-term implications for how the monarchy was perceived and understood. Charles stood and walked once again to the windows. Outside, the winter afternoon was growing dim, but the castle grounds remained active with the quiet efficiency that characterized royal life. Gardeners, security personnel, and household staff all continued their work, each playing their part in maintaining the institution that had served the nation for over 1,000 years. It struck him that this was perhaps the lesson Catherine had taught him through her own approach to royal duty. Service was not about grand gestures or formal pronouncements, but about the consistent, daily commitment to something larger than oneself. It was about showing up, doing the work, and caring deeply about the people and causes you served. The afternoon light was fading when Sir Clive knocked and entered the study. The BBC crew would arrive soon, and decisions needed to be made about the final version of the speech. Charles looked at his handwritten notes, then at the formal draft prepared by his staff. "Sir Clive," he said quietly, "I believe we need to make some adjustments to the speech." The private secretary approached the desk, his expression carefully neutral. Years of working with the royal family had taught him to expect the unexpected, especially when it came to matters of the heart. Charles handed him the handwritten pages, watching as the experienced courtier read through the new material. "This is quite different from what we discussed, Your Majesty," Sir Clive said carefully. "Yes," Charles replied. "But I believe it's what needs to be said." As the BBC crew set up their equipment in the castle's ornate drawing room, King Charles III made a decision that would define not just his fourth Christmas address, but his approach to the delicate balance between royal duty and human compassion. The words he would speak that evening would travel across the Commonwealth and around the world, carrying with them a message that transcended protocol and touched the very heart of what it meant to serve others with grace and dignity. The ornate drawing room at Windsor Castle had been transformed into a television studio, with cameras positioned to capture the perfect angle of King Charles III seated in his familiar chair. The room's rich burgundy walls and priceless artwork provided the traditional backdrop that viewers around the world had come to expect from the annual Christmas broadcast. Lighting technicians made final adjustments while sound engineers tested their equipment, but the king barely noticed the bustling activity around him. Charles sat quietly in his chair, the revised speech resting on the table beside him. The words he had crafted that morning felt heavy with meaning and possibility. In just a few hours, millions of people across the Commonwealth would gather with their families to hear his message. Children would pause their Christmas morning activities, grandparents would adjust their hearing aids, and families separated by distance would share the moment through phone calls and video links. The BBC director, Sarah Phillips, approached with her clipboard and professional smile. She had directed several of the late Queen's Christmas broadcasts and understood the gravity of these annual addresses. Each word would be scrutinized, each gesture analyzed for hidden meaning. The monarchy's relationship with its people was built on these moments of connection, when the sovereign stepped from behind the formal protocols to speak directly to the hearts of the nation. "We're ready when you are, Your Majesty," Sarah said softly. "The broadcast will reach an estimated 200 million viewers worldwide." Charles nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility that came with such moments. 200 million people would hear his words about Catherine. Some would be moved by his gesture of recognition, others might question whether personal family matters belonged in a Christmas address. But he had made his decision based on something deeper than public opinion polls or royal tradition. As the final preparations continued around him, Charles found his thoughts drifting to Catherine herself. She was spending Christmas quietly with William and their children, away from the usual royal gatherings. The family had made the difficult decision to prioritize her recovery and well-being over traditional obligations. It was a choice that spoke to the evolution of the modern monarchy, where human needs were increasingly recognized as important as royal duty. The king remembered the early days of Catherine's relationship with William, when the young woman from Berkshire was suddenly thrust into the most scrutinized family in the world. The press had followed her every move, analyzing her clothes, her expressions, even her family's background. Yet she had navigated those treacherous waters with remarkable composure, never seeking to exploit her position for personal gain or attention. Charles had watched her transformation from nervous girlfriend to confident royal with a mixture of admiration and paternal pride. She had brought qualities to the family that enriched them all, a groundedness rooted in her middle-class upbringing, an ability to connect with people from all backgrounds, and a work ethic that never sought shortcuts or special treatment. The director called for a final sound check, and Charles cleared his throat, testing his voice against the sensitive microphones. The familiar ritual helped calm his nerves, though he had delivered hundreds of speeches and addresses throughout his long career in public service. Tonight felt different because the stakes were more personal. He thought about the criticism the royal family had faced in recent years. Some commentators had accused them of being out of touch with ordinary people's struggles, too focused on tradition and protocol to understand modern challenges. Others had questioned the relevance of monarchy in the 21st century, wondering whether an institution rooted in medieval concepts could serve contemporary democratic societies. But Charles had always believed that the monarchy's strength lay not in its distance from the people, but in its ability to represent timeless values while adapting to changing circumstances. Service, duty, compassion, and commitment to something greater than oneself, these principles remained relevant regardless of technological advances or social evolution. Catherine embodied those principles in ways that transcended royal protocol. Her work with children's charities wasn't motivated by duty alone, but by genuine care for vulnerable young people. Her support for mental health initiatives came from understanding that emotional well-being was as important as physical health. Her public appearances, whether at state functions or community events, demonstrated authentic interest in the people she met. The king also reflected on the broader context of his Christmas message. The world was facing unprecedented challenges: economic uncertainty, environmental concerns, political divisions, and ongoing recovery from global health crises. People were looking for leadership that acknowledged their struggles while offering hope and direction. Perhaps recognizing Catherine's courage in facing personal challenges would resonate with others who were dealing with their own difficulties. Sir Clive Alderton appeared at the king's side, carrying a cup of tea and the latest polling data about public opinion regarding the royal family. Charles glanced at the numbers but found them less relevant than usual. This decision wasn't about popularity ratings or media approval. It was about doing what felt right as a father, a king, and a human being. "The Queen Consort sends her regards," Sir Clive whispered. "She said to tell you that sometimes the heart knows what protocol cannot teach." Charles smiled at Camilla's message. His wife had always possessed an intuitive understanding of people and relationships that complemented his more analytical approach. She had watched Catherine's journey with the same protective instincts she felt for all her stepchildren, recognizing the unique pressures that came with marrying into the royal family. The director called for places, and the room fell silent except for the quiet hum of television equipment. Charles settled into his chair, adjusting his tie and checking that his speech was positioned correctly on the table. The red recording light on the nearest camera would soon illuminate, marking the beginning of a broadcast that would travel instantly across oceans and continents. As he waited for the countdown, Charles thought about the millions of families who would be watching. Parents trying to maintain Christmas traditions despite financial pressures. Elderly people spending the holiday alone, finding comfort in the familiar ritual of the royal Christmas broadcast. Military families separated by deployment, gathered around screens in bases around the world. Immigrants who had made new homes in Commonwealth countries, seeking connection to traditions that bridged their old and new worlds. Each of these families faced their own challenges, their own moments of struggle and triumph. Many would understand the delicate balance between public duty and private pain that Catherine had navigated throughout her health journey. Others would relate to the way families support each other through difficult times, sometimes with grand gestures but more often through quiet presence and understanding. The sound engineer gave a thumbs up, indicating that audio levels were perfect. The lighting director made a final adjustment to eliminate a shadow that had been bothering him. Sarah Phillips positioned herself beside the main camera, ready to guide the king through the broadcast with subtle hand signals and encouraging nods. Charles took a deep breath and reminded himself of the central message he wanted to convey. Beyond the specific acknowledgement of Catherine, he hoped to communicate the idea that service to others, whether as a monarch, a family member, or an ordinary citizen, was most meaningful when it came from genuine care rather than mere obligation. The late Queen Elizabeth II had understood this principle throughout her 70-year reign. She had shown that duty and compassion were not opposing forces but complementary aspects of meaningful leadership. Charles hoped that his own approach to monarchy would honor that legacy while addressing the unique challenges of his time. 30 seconds, Your Majesty, the director announced. The king straightened in his chair and focused on the camera that would carry his image and words around the world. Behind the lens, he envisioned the faces of the people who would be watching, children excited about Christmas morning, teenagers reluctantly gathered with extended family, adults juggling the demands of work and relationships, elderly citizens reflecting on decades of Christmas broadcasts. He thought about Catherine watching from her private retreat, perhaps surprised by his decision to include her in such a public forum. He hoped she would understand that his words came not from a desire to intrude on her privacy, but from recognition of her contributions to the family and the institution they all served. 10 seconds, came the director's voice. Charles placed his hands calmly in his lap and prepared to speak words that would bridge the gap between royal duty and human affection. The red light on the camera began to glow, and millions of people around the world turned their attention to Windsor Castle, ready to share in the annual tradition that connected the monarchy to its people through the simple act of one person speaking honestly to many. The king looked directly into the camera lens and began to speak, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and the warmth of personal conviction. The words he had crafted that morning would soon travel across the Commonwealth, carrying with them a message about the power of recognition, the importance of family support, and the grace that could be found in acknowledging both struggle and strength. As he spoke, Charles felt the profound responsibility of his position, but also the deep satisfaction that came from using that platform to honor someone who had earned recognition through service, dignity, and quiet courage. The Christmas broadcast had begun, and, with it, a gentle homage that would touch hearts around the world. The familiar opening notes of the national anthem faded as King Charles III looked directly into the camera, his expression warm but dignified. Across the Commonwealth, families settled into comfortable chairs and sofas, children temporarily setting aside new toys to observe the annual tradition their grandparents had established decades earlier. The moment had arrived for the king to deliver his fourth Christmas address, unaware that his words would soon create ripples of emotion and discussion that would extend far beyond the holiday season. "My family and I wish you all a very happy Christmas," Charles began, his voice carrying the measured tone that had become familiar to viewers since his accession to the throne. "This has been a year of great change for many of us, a time when we have been reminded that life's most important lessons often come through the challenges we face together." The king paused, allowing his words to settle before continuing. Behind the formal language lay months of careful consideration about how to balance personal feelings with royal protocol. Each phrase had been weighed not only for its immediate impact but for its broader implications about the monarchy's role in modern society. Throughout this past year, I have been deeply moved by the countless examples of service and dedication I have witnessed across our communities, he continued. From healthcare workers who never stopped caring for others, to teachers who found new ways to reach their students, to neighbors who checked on elderly friends during difficult times. These everyday acts of kindness remind us that true service comes not from titles or positions, but from the genuine desire to make life better for others. As viewers around the world listened to these familiar themes of service and community, many were unaware that something unprecedented was building within the carefully structured address. Royal watchers, accustomed to analyzing every word and gesture for hidden meaning, had not yet detected the personal note that would soon distinguish this broadcast from all previous Christmas messages. In homes across Britain, families shared the moment in ways that reflected the diversity of modern society. In Manchester, 3 generations of the Patel family gathered around their television, with grandmother translating key phrases into Gujarati for visiting relatives. In Edinburgh, university student Emma MacLeod watched via video call with her parents in the Highlands, the screen split between the King's image and her family's living room. In Wales, the Jones family paused their preparation of Christmas dinner to observe the tradition that had marked holiday celebrations for as long as anyone could remember. Charles continued his address with reflections on the importance of faith, compassion, and hope during uncertain times. He spoke about the need for understanding between different communities and the strength that came from diversity within unity. These themes resonated with listeners who were navigating their own challenges, from economic pressures to family difficulties to health concerns. But, as the King's speech progressed, astute observers began to notice a subtle shift in tone. His words became slightly more personal, his examples more specific to experiences that suggested intimate knowledge rather than general observation. The transition was so gradual that many viewers were unaware they were witnessing something unprecedented in the history of royal Christmas broadcasts. This year has taught us many things about resilience, the King said, his voice taking on a warmer quality that caught the attention of experienced royal commentators watching from newsrooms around the world. We have seen how strength can be quiet rather than loud, how courage often appears in the decision to continue serving others even when facing personal challenges, and how the greatest support sometimes comes through simple presence rather than grand gestures. Royal historian Dr. Margaret Thornton, watching from her study at Oxford University, set down her notepad and leaned forward in her chair. After 50 years of analyzing royal communications, she recognized that something significant was happening. The King's language was moving beyond the traditional boundaries of Christmas address protocol into territory that suggested a more personal message was coming. Meanwhile, at their private residence, Catherine, Princess of Wales, watched with Prince William and their children. She had not expected to be mentioned in the Christmas broadcast and had approached the viewing as a family tradition rather than a personal concern. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, paid varying degrees of attention to their grandfather's words, more interested in the promise of Christmas dinner and afternoon games than in analyzing royal protocol. But, as Catherine listened to the King's evolving message about service and resilience, she began to sense that his words might be building towards something that could include her own recent experiences. William noticed his wife's increased attention to the broadcast and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support that had become second nature during the months of her health challenges. Back at Windsor Castle, the recording continued with King Charles fully committed to the course he had chosen that morning. The BBC crew, unaware of the specific content changes he had made, maintained their professional focus on ensuring perfect audio and visual quality. Director Sarah Phillips watched the monitor, noting the King's relaxed demeanor and natural delivery of what she assumed was the carefully rehearsed speech approved by his advisors. In our own family, the King said, the phrase immediately alerting royal watchers to an unusual personal turn in the address. We have been reminded this year that the qualities we most admire in public service, grace under pressure, dedication to duty, and concern for others, often shine brightest during private challenges. Dr. Thornton reached for her phone to alert colleagues at the BBC that they were witnessing a potentially historic moment. Royal Christmas broadcasts traditionally avoided specific family references beyond general good wishes. The King's decision to introduce personal elements suggested either a significant shift in royal communication strategy or a spontaneous decision to address recent events more directly than protocol typically allowed. In newsrooms across the Commonwealth, journalists began taking notes more urgently. The annual Christmas broadcast usually generated respectful coverage focusing on the King's general themes and any political implications of his comments about national or international issues. But, this year's address was developing a human interest angle that could dominate headlines for days. Charles continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion that betrayed the personal investment behind his words. I have been particularly moved by the way some individuals continue to fulfill their responsibilities to others even while navigating their own difficulties. The decision to maintain service to the community while dealing with personal challenges demonstrates a kind of strength that inspires all of us. Catherine felt her heart rate increase as she realized the king's words were indeed building toward a recognition of her situation. The past months had been intensely private, a period when the royal family had worked carefully to balance public interest with personal dignity. She had never expected her father-in-law to reference her health journey in such a public forum, and she was uncertain whether to feel honored or concerned about the implications. William squeezed her hand gently, recognizing the emotions that were undoubtedly flowing through his wife's mind. He too was surprised by his father's decision to personalize the Christmas address, but he understood the love and respect that motivated the gesture. Throughout their marriage, William had watched his father develop genuine affection and admiration for Catherine, appreciating the stability and warmth she brought to the family. The king paused in his delivery, allowing the weight of his previous statements to settle before moving toward the most significant moment of his address. Around the world, viewers who had been only half listening began to pay closer attention, sensing that something important was happening even if they couldn't yet identify exactly what it was. Such grace and dedication deserve our recognition and gratitude, Charles continued, his eyes fixed on the camera with an intensity that conveyed deep sincerity. When we see examples of quiet strength and selfless commitment, especially from those who serve in the public eye while managing private challenges, we are reminded that true nobility comes not from birth or title, but from character and devotion to others. In the BBC newsroom, senior correspondent Nicholas Witchell turned to his colleagues with the expression of someone who had just witnessed something unprecedented. After decades of covering the royal family, he understood that the king was approaching territory that no previous Christmas broadcast had explored. The implications for royal communication strategy, family dynamics, and public perception were enormous. Royal protection officers at various locations around the country began receiving discreet communications about increased media interest in the ongoing broadcast. Social media platforms showed early signs of elevated engagement as viewers began sharing their observations about the unusually personal tone of the king's message. But, for Charles himself, the weight of public analysis was secondary to the personal conviction that had driven his decision to include Catherine in his Christmas address. As he prepared to speak the words that would make his tribute explicit and unmistakable, he felt the deep satisfaction that came from using his platform to honor someone who truly deserved recognition. The moment that would define his fourth Christmas address was about to arrive, carrying with it implications that would extend far beyond the immediate holiday season and into the broader understanding of how the modern monarchy balanced public duty with personal compassion. The moment had arrived. King Charles III took a barely perceptible breath as he prepared to speak the words that would transform his Christmas address from traditional royal message to deeply personal tribute. Across the Commonwealth, millions of viewers continued their holiday activities, unaware that they were about to witness an unprecedented moment in royal broadcasting history. This year, I have been particularly inspired by my daughter-in-law, Catherine, whose grace and courage during her health challenges have reminded us all that true strength often reveals itself not in moments of triumph, but in times of trial, the king said, his voice carrying unmistakable warmth and sincerity. The words hung in the air like a gentle bell that had been struck. In living rooms across Britain and throughout the Commonwealth, viewers who had been half listening suddenly gave the broadcast their full attention. Children looked up from their Christmas toys. Adults reached for remote controls to increase the volume. Elderly viewers adjusted their glasses to ensure they had heard correctly. At their private residence, Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes. The public acknowledgement she had never sought, never expected, and certainly never requested had just been offered by the monarch himself during the most watched royal broadcast of the year. William's arm tightened around her shoulders as he too processed the significance of his father's words. Their children, sensing the emotional shift in the room, looked between their parents with the intuitive awareness that something important had just happened. In newsrooms around the world, the reaction was immediate and electric. Phones began ringing as editors sought confirmation of what they had just heard. Social media platforms registered instant spikes in activity as viewers shared their reactions to the king's unexpected tribute. Royal correspondents who had been preparing routine coverage of the Christmas address suddenly found themselves witnessing the most personally revealing royal communication in decades. BBC royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell grabbed his phone to alert the newsroom that they were dealing with a major story. After 30 years of covering the royal family, he understood that King Charles had just crossed a line that no previous monarch had approached. The decision to specifically name Catherine and reference her health challenges represented a fundamental shift in how the royal family communicated about personal matters. Dr. Margaret Thornton, the Oxford royal historian, sat in stunned silence for several seconds before reaching for her laptop. She knew she was witnessing history in the making, a moment that would be analyzed and discussed by historians for generations to come. The king's decision to break with centuries of protocol had implications that extended far beyond the immediate gesture of support for Catherine. But the king was not finished. Having crossed the traditional boundaries of royal Christmas broadcasts, he continued with words that made clear this was not a spontaneous slip but a carefully considered tribute. Her dedication to her royal duties, even while facing personal challenges, exemplifies the very best of public service, Charles continued, his eyes never wavering from the camera. She has shown us that true service often requires the courage to continue caring for others even when we are dealing with our own difficulties. In doing so, she has not only fulfilled her responsibilities to the crown, but has provided an example of resilience that strengthens us all. The unprecedented nature of these words was not lost on constitutional experts watching around the world. Professor David Richardson from the London School of Constitutional Studies immediately began drafting notes for what he knew would be urgent media requests for analysis. The monarch had just used his Christmas address to offer explicit praise for a specific family member's handling of personal challenges, something that had never happened in the history of royal broadcasting. Yet for all the constitutional and protocol implications, the most profound impact was being felt in much more personal terms. Across Britain, viewers who had followed Catherine's journey from middle-class student to beloved royal found themselves deeply moved by the king's gesture. Many had watched her navigate the complexities of royal life with grace and dignity, and the public acknowledgement of her recent challenges resonated with anyone who had faced their own health struggles. In Manchester, grandmother Priya Patel wiped tears from her eyes as she watched with her extended family. Having undergone her own health challenges the previous year, she felt a profound connection to the idea that strength could be found in continuing to care for others during difficult times. The king's words transformed Catherine from distant royal figure to relatable human being facing universal experiences. In Edinburgh, university student Emma MacLeod watched her parents' reaction via video call as they processed the king's tribute. Her father, a proud Scotsman who had often been skeptical of royal privilege, found himself genuinely moved by the humanity displayed in the king's words. The acknowledgement of struggle and resilience spoke to values that transcended social class or constitutional position. The international impact was equally significant. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and other Commonwealth nations, viewers were witnessing their shared monarch demonstrate a level of personal vulnerability and family loyalty that challenged stereotypes about royal emotional distance. Canadian journalist Sarah Chin immediately recognized that this moment would reshape how the royal family was perceived in nations where Republican sentiment had been growing. Back at Windsor Castle, King Charles continued his address, but the words that followed would be overshadowed by his tribute to Catherine. He spoke about hope for the future, the importance of service to community, and the need for compassion in an increasingly divided world. These themes, though important and carefully crafted, could not compete with the emotional impact of his personal acknowledgement of his daughter-in-law's grace under pressure. Royal protection officers at locations around the country began preparing for increased media attention and public interest. The king's tribute to Catherine had transformed what should have been a routine Christmas day into a significant news event with implications for royal family dynamics, public perception of the monarchy, and broader conversations about privacy, duty, and family support. In the BBC control room, director Sarah Phillips maintained her professional composure while internally marveling at the king's decision to deviate so dramatically from traditional Christmas address content. She had worked on royal broadcasts for over a decade and had never experienced anything approaching this level of personal revelation from a serving monarch. As the address moved toward its conclusion, King Charles returned to more traditional themes of faith, service, and hope for the coming year. But the damage, or rather, the transformation, had been accomplished. His fourth Christmas address would be remembered not for its closing remarks about Commonwealth unity or calls for charitable service, but for the unprecedented moment when a king chose to honor a family member's private courage in the most public forum available to the monarchy. Social media analysis would later show that mentions of Catherine, Princess of Wales, and royal health spiked dramatically in the minutes following the king's tribute. Hashtags related to family support, royal humanity, and grace under pressure began trending globally. The king's decision had touched something deep in the public consciousness, connecting the formal institution of monarchy to universal human experiences of struggle and support. But perhaps the most significant impact was being felt in the quiet privacy of Catherine's own home, or the woman who had never sought public recognition for her private challenges found herself overwhelmed by her father-in-law's gesture of public support. The king's words had validated not only her approach to royal duty but her fundamental belief that service to others remained important even during personal difficulties. As the Christmas address moved toward its final moments, millions of viewers remained focused on the unprecedented tribute they had just witnessed. The king's decision to acknowledge Catherine's grace and courage had fundamentally altered the relationship between royal family and public, demonstrating that even the most traditional institutions could evolve to embrace both duty and humanity in ways that resonated with contemporary values. As King Charles III concluded his Christmas address with traditional wishes for peace and prosperity in the coming year, the full magnitude of what had just transpired began to settle across the watching world. The red recording light on the BBC camera flickered off, but the impact of the King's unprecedented tribute to Catherine would continue to resonate long after the broadcast equipment was packed away from Windsor Castle. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "That was beautiful," Director Sarah Phillips said quietly as the King remained seated for a moment, processing what he had just accomplished. The technical crew began their efficient dismantling of the temporary studio, but their usual post-broadcast chatter was subdued. Everyone present sensed they had witnessed something historically significant. Charles rose from his chair and walked to the tall windows overlooking the castle grounds, now shrouded in winter twilight. The decision he had made that morning, refined throughout the day, and delivered just minutes ago, felt like a weight lifted from his shoulders. For years, he had watched Catherine navigate the impossible balance between public duty and private dignity with remarkable grace. The opportunity to acknowledge her courage publicly had felt not just appropriate, but necessary. Sir Clive Alderton approached with his usual diplomatic discretion, carrying the King's personal phone which had already begun buzzing with messages from family members, government officials, and palace staff around the world. The private secretary's expression revealed nothing, but Charles could see in his eyes the recognition that they had just crossed into uncharted territory in royal communications. "The initial reaction appears quite positive, Your Majesty," Sir Clive said carefully. "Though I suspect we'll have numerous requests for interviews and clarification over the coming days." Charles nodded, having anticipated the media storm that would inevitably follow his decision. Royal watchers and constitutional experts would spend weeks analyzing every word, debating the implications for royal protocol, and speculating about the deeper family dynamics that had motivated such an unprecedented gesture. But he felt confident that history would judge his decision favorably, recognizing it as a moment when humanity trumped protocol in service of a greater truth. Meanwhile, across the Commonwealth, the immediate aftermath of the broadcast was unfolding in millions of homes where families processed what they had just witnessed. The King's tribute to Catherine had transformed routine holiday viewing into a shared moment of unexpected emotional connection with the royal family. In Catherine's own home, the Princess of Wales sat in quiet reflection as the credits rolled on the broadcast. The children had returned to their Christmas activities, but William remained beside his wife, understanding the complex emotions she was experiencing. Being acknowledged so publicly for private struggles was both deeply moving and slightly overwhelming for someone who had always preferred to let her actions speak louder than any words. "He didn't need to do that," Catherine said softly, her voice thick with emotion. William smiled, recognizing in his wife's response the same selfless instincts that had prompted his father's tribute in the first place. "He wanted to," he replied. "And, frankly, it was long overdue." The phone in their home began ringing as well, with calls from other family members who had watched the broadcast. Princess Anne was among the first to call, her typically direct communication style softened by genuine warmth as she expressed approval for her brother's decision to honor Catherine publicly. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, long-standing working royals who understood the pressures of public service, sent a text message expressing their admiration for both Catherine's dignity and Charles's recognition of it. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Queen Elizabeth II, former private secretary, now retired but still deeply connected to royal circles, sent a carefully worded message suggesting that the late Queen would have approved of her son's decision to balance protocol with compassion. The message carried particular weight because it came from someone who had observed the monarchy's evolution over several decades. In newsrooms around the world, the scramble to analyze and contextualize the King's tribute was reaching fever pitch. Constitutional experts were being pulled from Christmas dinners to provide commentary on the unprecedented nature of the royal communication. Social media platforms were experiencing unprecedented engagement as viewers shared their reactions to the King's words. Royal correspondent Victoria Murphy, writing for a major British newspaper, found herself crafting what she knew would be one of the most significant royal stories of the year. The king's decision to acknowledge Catherine's health challenges and praise her continued dedication to royal duties represented a fundamental shift in how the royal family approached the balance between public transparency and private dignity. "This is not just about Catherine," Murphy wrote in her analysis. "This is about a monarch using the most significant platform available to him to demonstrate that the royal family understands the human cost of public service and is willing to acknowledge it publicly. It represents a new model of royal communication that prioritizes authentic emotion over traditional protocol." International reactions were equally significant. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a statement praising the King's heartfelt tribute to the Princess of Wales, whose grace and dedication to service exemplify the values we cherish in the Commonwealth. Similar responses came from government leaders across the realm, recognizing that the King's words had strengthened rather than diminished the monarchy's connection to contemporary values. Academic experts in constitutional history were already beginning to frame the King's Christmas address within broader discussions about the monarchy's evolution. Professor Jennifer Williams from Cambridge University noted that the tribute to Catherine represented a continuation of trends that had begun during Queen Elizabeth II's later years, when the royal family had gradually become more open about personal challenges while maintaining their commitment to public service. But perhaps the most meaningful responses came from ordinary citizens who saw in the King's tribute a recognition of struggles they themselves had faced. Messages poured into royal social media accounts from people who had dealt with health challenges while trying to maintain their responsibilities to family and community. The King's acknowledgement of Catherine's grace under pressure resonated with anyone who had experienced the difficulty of continuing to care for others while dealing with personal difficulties. Mental health organizations noted that the King's words had potential therapeutic value for anyone struggling with the guilt that often accompanied health challenges. By praising Catherine's decision to continue her royal duties while managing her health situation, the King had validated the choices of countless individuals who had faced similar dilemmas about balancing personal needs with obligations to others. As Christmas evening settled across the Commonwealth, the long-term implications of the King's tribute began to crystallize. Royal biographers recognized that December 25 would be remembered as a watershed moment in the monarchy's approach to personal communication. The decision to honor Catherine publicly had demonstrated that the institution could evolve to embrace both traditional values and contemporary understanding of mental health, family support, and authentic emotion. The King himself, now changed into comfortable evening clothes and preparing to join family members for a private Christmas dinner, reflected on the day's events with quiet satisfaction. The morning's uncertainty about whether to include personal elements in his Christmas address seemed distant now, replaced by confidence that he had made the right choice for both his family and the institution he served. Years later, historians would mark King Charles III's fourth Christmas address as a turning point in royal communication, the moment when a monarch chose vulnerability over distance, humanity over protocol, and love over tradition. But, in the immediate aftermath of the broadcast, the most important impact was felt by a daughter-in-law who had never sought public recognition but who deserved acknowledgement for the grace, courage, and quiet strength she had demonstrated in service to both her family and her nation. The gentle royal homage had accomplished exactly what the King had hoped. It honored Catherine's contributions while demonstrating that the monarchy's greatest strength lay not in its remove from human experience, but in its ability to represent the highest aspirations of service, dignity, and compassion that connected all people, regardless of their station in life. The words spoken that Christmas evening would echo through royal history as a testament to the power of recognition, the importance of family support, and the grace that could be found in acknowledging both struggle and strength.